what lets evil grow is when good people do nothing. And that stands in my head as a leader of a business, as a leader of an organization, as when I do nothing, that's how bad habits grow. And so by doing nothing, I'm doing something. It's just not having the effect that I want to have within the organization.
Chad Peterman here, and you are listening to Can't Stop the Growth, a platform for leaders and teams to grow and thrive. We highlight the importance of personal development, pursuing greatness, and always chasing your potential. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to another episode of Can't Stop the Growth. I'm your host, Chad Peterman, and today I have a local Hoosier with us, which is always good to talk to somebody who's in the state of Indiana doing really, really cool things. I was on his podcast while we recorded it a couple of weeks ago, and really excited to have him on. Our conversation stirred up a lot around leadership. I think one interesting thing that I want to talk with him about, simply because in the trades we're effectively leading remote teams because all of our technicians are out on the field. So kind of how he does all of that. So without further ado, would like to welcome Matt Tait, CEO of Decimal. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thanks, Chad. I'm real happy to be here, and I'd say continue our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think we talked for quite a while on yours, and a lot of really good insights that came out of that. I know I took down quite a few notes as far as just, oh yeah, shoot, I should think about that and different stuff like that. So I guess before we get started, maybe give the listeners, because Decimal is not, like trade specific, maybe give a little bit of your personal background, because it's not just Decimal, but a number of entrepreneurial ventures in your life. Maybe give kind of the rundown of what you've been involved in, and then maybe Decimal as it is today.
So kind of like you, I grew up in entrepreneurship. And, my dad was a home builder here on the north side of Indianapolis. And from the age of about 7 or 8 on, I was throwing bricks into dumpsters and picking up nails off of floors. And then every summer thereafter, I worked on one of the trades, just interning and just kind of spending my summers. So that made me want to be an entrepreneur, which ironically led me to start my career off. I'm a recovering attorney and practiced law for a few years, and then really liked the tech scene. And Decimal is my third company. I think it doesn't matter what type of business you're in, the 3 worst parts about it are HR, IT, and accounting. And at Decimal, we help businesses, a lot of trades companies, with their bookkeeping and tax and paying the bills and stuff. So that's kind of what we do. And like you said, we've worked with about 1,000 businesses over the last 4.5 years, and it's been a fun process for us. But we are remote. We've got 85 people in 5 countries, 27 states. And I was actually talking to a buddy of mine who runs another company in the trades, and he was like, I've been doing this for about 20 years, and tech just made it sexy in the pandemic. So I do think there's a lot of crossover.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think having led multiple companies, I guess maybe just to start out, how have you noticed that your kind of leadership philosophy has changed? Maybe things that you've learned from one company that it's like, oh crap, I don't want to do that again. Because I have those moments all the time. It's like, God, if I were to start over, I definitely would do this a little bit differently, or get out ahead of this, because it becomes a problem as you grow. What are maybe some of those lessons learned or principles that you use to kind of guide how you kind of lead your company today?
One of the biggest things that I've learned, particularly with a remote company, is when you have an office, you can kind of show up, and whatever mood you're in that day can pervade the rest of the company. If you are happy, if you're excited, you can get everybody else happy and excited. If you have a new baby and you haven't slept in 4 days and you feel like shit and it's really bad, all of a sudden everybody else that pervades them. So with a remote company, it's a lot different in a really good way. And for me, being able to lead by example and to just have everybody else lead the same way without having to be there, without having to be the guy that's banging on the drum every day, and to truly build a culture that's sustainable without me there, has been a huge help and a huge learning for me. And I think also just like, I don't know, when I was younger and I'm over 40, so I feel old. I used to feel like I had to, hop out of the car at my job, put on a face and be that kind of inspiration to everybody. And that's just not possible. And being myself and leading that way has helped me to connect better with people, and to lead better. And I would just say, like, generally be an easier, better person.
Yeah. No, I think that, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this. I felt like early on in my kind of, learning to become a leader, it was, to your point, kind of put on that facade of I'm invincible, nothing affects me. We're going to go and take over the world and it's going to be awesome. And I think what I learned, and I think this was, I would say a big factor of that was having children. And, obviously they can sway your mood. You mentioned, not having slept. I remember those days. But, I think that being human is one of those characteristics that never really gets mentioned in relation to leadership, as far as you being human. And being able to relate to other people, as opposed to everybody just looking at you as this like example of what I should be and then feeling bad when I'm not.
No, I think you're exactly right. I was talking about it the other day on how, it is our job as leaders to set the tone. But at the same time, it's also our job to be ourselves. And I don't know about you, but it took me some growing up to figure out who I was and how I wanted to lead. And I think I faked it a lot more before I'd figured out what that was. And I wish I'd have taken more time to focus on that in my younger years. I think I would have gotten there sooner. But I also think that there's that other flip side of, just because you feel some way doesn't mean you always have to outwardly present it. Like you do have to consider how you are presenting your authenticity and presenting your leadership. If you're unhappy with somebody and they're maybe not hitting their quotas or they're not doing their job well, same thing with kids. You really want to yell at them sometimes, but that's not the right thing to do. You may want to like close the door and scream, but you have to figure out the best way within your culture, within who you are, to deal with those situations and not emotionally respond every time. And I think that's also something that I've kind of learned over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on there as far as, I think from a leadership perspective, it's always, well, why don't they just understand? Well, why don't they just do it this way? Or what don't they get about this? And I think it's sometimes about taking a step back and understanding that as the leader, it's your job to communicate with them one way or the other, and everybody responds a little bit differently. And it's your job to figure that out. Whereas, a lot of times it's, well, they should just figure it out and do it my way. It's like, well, that's not quite how the world works. But yeah, I think that that's an interesting topic. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about as it relates to, we've talked a little bit about leadership and how you show up, and obviously showing up in a remote workplace is, it's different. I'm not going to say it's harder or easier or whatever it may be, but, and you may be able to shed some light on that, but more so like, how do you guys, like when you talk about building culture and everybody's on a computer screen for the most part, like what's your kind of philosophy on that? Because I think that people in the trades, I don't know that I've really tapped into how do these people lead their companies, because it could glean some insights for us because, 2/3 of our team is out on the road and is essentially remote every single day.
Oh, big time. I'd given this, so it's funny. I do think running a remote company well is harder. And I'll say it for you, because you have to be more intentional. You have to just be more intentional about everything. And I joke with buddies of mine, and I'm sure you have them, that they're running companies that have an office and they can lazily build a great culture because they're present. And being present is the first step in any type of leadership, parenting, being a spouse, et cetera. Like you have to be present to be good at pretty much anything. When it comes to being remote, the three things that I focus on are, number one, make it simple. Make it easy for people to understand. So we talk a lot about culture. We have 4 very clear, very simple values. Number 2 is repeat it all the time. Like my job, I joke all the time, is I am the chief repeating officer at Decimal. And connecting it to something you said earlier, parenting, lock that in for me. I can tell my son 1,000 times to pick up his shoes. He doesn't listen, except for the one time when I absolutely needed him to, and it works. Like, it takes 1,000 times to get through to him. And our teams are the same way. They're doing a lot of other things. So we have to repeat. And then the third thing that I think is as important as the other two is anchoring it in key behaviors. So we anchor our values, our culture on key specific behaviors that we want them to achieve. So for us, some of our key behaviors would be, we're going to be the most responsive team that anybody's ever going to deal with. So how do we do that? Well, here's how we train you to be responsive. Here's how we put a system in place to track that. Like, we have accountability as a major metric of really tracking how we connect behavior to goal or culture. And then we repeat it all the time and we track it, and we've ingrained that into just how we operate at every level of the business. Does that make sense?
Perfectly. I mean, you hit on two things there that I was in a meeting, I think it was last week, or my days are all running together, I think. But we were talking about this, and we were talking about the essence of how do you build the culture. And I think your point about chief repeating officer, I had a comment not too long ago where I said culture is all about consistency. It doesn't have to be flowery. It doesn't have to be this, we've got ping pong tables and this and nap pods and all of this stuff. And I always joke about that stuff, but I really think it comes down to the little things that we do consistently. It's just like anything in life. And to me, culture is very much similar. It is, what are the things that we do repeatedly, day in and day out, that eventually become ingrained into how you do things. I always think about one of our core values is do what's right. And it's like, well, do what's right. Like, how does that become like a thing? Well, you just do what's right on a daily basis. Every call, we're just doing what's right. And then it just becomes kind of the norm. And I think the other piece that you said was showing people what it means to exhibit your values. Like, everybody's got the real colorful values on the wall and the this and the that. And like, if you asked 10 people in your organization, what does it mean to be humble? Or what does it mean to, another one of our values is lead ourselves. Well, what does that mean? And I think you made a great point and in that you need to show them what that is, what it is, and also what it isn't. It isn't this, which I think is important.
You have to be careful sometimes on how you show the negative, because you also don't want to, like, there are negative things that happen that everybody knows about, and you don't want to highlight that. But what I generally find is that people know the negative, but you do need to highlight. You have to show both examples. And I think that's really important. One of the ways I think about it is when I'm trying to build a new habit in myself, it takes a lot of planning and forethought. It takes a lot of repetition. And it takes also giving myself some grace that I'm going to screw it up, but then consistently showing up to keep doing it. It's harder when you're getting to a bunch of other people to do that, but the same principles apply. And so I'm just trying to build the habits of doing the right things the decimal way in our group of people. And you're right, you have to just repeat that and connect it.
Yeah, no, I think that's so powerful. One of the things that I wanted to bring up to you, just because I enjoyed our conversation before, and it's something that, I think we're going through kind of just like a shift in like trying to balance the cultural piece that, hey, everybody feels loved and cared for and nurtured, while also being a high performance team. Like, hey, we're going to be, we're going to love on each other and this is going to be great, but like, we got to get stuff done too. How do you balance that?
Poorly a lot of the time.
Yeah, me too.
Yes. I think that balance is probably one of the harder ones that I struggle with. Some of what we have tried is we've built accountability into our culture. And what we talk a lot about, and particularly I love, for me, coaching the management layers at Decimal. So if it's like my leadership team or their direct reports or our team managers, whoever it is, I like coaching those groups of people. And part of what I like to coach with them is a lot of what accountability means for you and what accountability means within your team. and talking about how if you have really great people on your team and culturally you have somebody that's amazing, but they're just not keeping up, everybody else knows, and it's already eroding your culture. They've noticed it before you ever will, which means that you already have somebody in there that's eroding the culture of the team. And when the team's culture starts to erode, that starts to grow. In essence, it's like a disease that grows. It's a weed that is growing within your organization. And one of the things I like to train my team on is how to spot those, how to really give a couple of attempts to coach them up, because you want to show, like, we're deeply caring people. We want people to be their best self, and we want to put them in a position to do it. But then we also owe it to the broader organization, to the company, or a team lead owes it to the rest of their team to say, hey, I am going to very humanely remove you from this situation because the rest of this team relies on me. And even though it hurts, and in an organization like yours, I can't imagine you've grown even well beyond what we have, but we've seen that there are people that are really great at a certain stage, and then you exceed that stage and you realize, gosh, they're not the right person. And you either have to hire above them or you have to find them a new home or whatever it is. That part of accountability is, I think it's one of the toughest parts of our job. And as you train other leaders, you have to train them. That's going to be one of the hardest parts of their job too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think everybody probably deals with that. And I think what you said is so important, is that, like, when someone isn't being accountable or not doing what they're supposed to be doing, like, the broader team knows. And I think it's sometimes we're like, well, it'll be fine. It'll be all right, whatever it may be. And to me, that can sometimes, I feel like, take away from what we're trying to do in leading others. It's like, well, you let so-and-so get away with murder, basically. And it's like, well,
why can't I?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's just a great point of how not addressing something can lend itself. And I'm as guilty as anybody on that. I'm very fearful of conflict and different stuff like that. And it's a tough thing for me to do, but in the times that I do it, it's like having that tough conversation. It's like, oh God, I don't want to have this. I don't want to have this. And then once you do, it's like, well, now I feel a lot better.
Oh, I'm a total nerd. I'm a history buff. And there's that old, I think it was World War II quote on, what lets evil grow is when good people do nothing. And that stands in my head as a leader of a business, as a leader of an organization, as when I do nothing, that's how bad habits grow. And so by doing nothing, I'm doing something. It's just not having the effect that I want to have within the organization. And people notice. That's probably the greatest comparison to parenthood and being a boss is, no matter what happens, people notice. My kids notice. They watch and they absorb. And it's the same thing within our companies and our organizations, is our team watches and they absorb. Whether we want them to or not, they do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and something that I'm thinking about right now, a few conversations I probably need to have. Not that anyone's in trouble, but it's more so you can tell when two people in the organization don't respect each other, or there's been so much stuff has been allowed to go that rebuilding that trust has got to be kind of top priority. And for me, it's can we just get everybody in the same room and just hash this out? No one's in trouble. This is how I feel. This is how you feel. Let's figure this out.
It's funny you bring that up. I've had a coach for a few years. When we started growing, I was like, look, we're hitting things that I've never done. And I really wanted to find a coach that I could basically pay that had been there to help me. And he's been an amazing addition to just my mental health and leadership. But one of the first things he noticed was, he said, you're a conflict avoider. And I'm like, no, I'm not. If I got a problem with somebody, the first thing I'm going to do is Chad, you and I have a problem. Let's talk about it. Or here's what. But he goes, no, you're a conflict avoider. When two people on your team have a problem, your way to solve it is to say hey, you guys go figure that out. And then you walk away. He goes, that is you avoiding conflict. And you have to actually run through a process with them to highlight that they have a conflict, highlight how they need to solve that conflict, give them an opportunity to do it together themselves, but then follow up, make sure it happened. And if it doesn't, you have to go in and solve that conflict. And in the last year and a half since we worked through that, the performance within my organization has just skyrocketed because we stopped letting those little things, those weeds fester. But it was out of my comfort zone. It was also something that, quite honestly, if you'd have told me if I'm a conflict avoider, I would have told you you're nuts. But I truly actually was, and that rocked me to think of it that way.
Yeah. Well, that rocks me even more because I know that I am a conflict avoider, so I can only imagine that my stuff is even worse. So I've got some work to do. But no, I mean, I think it's easy too from a leadership perspective, and this is not me making my actions okay, but I think it's one of those things where as a leader at a fast growing company, you're one, I don't have time to do that. We're just going to keep working and we'll just work through it and everybody will be fine. Taking 20 minutes out of my day to sit down and hash out this conflict, but it's kind of that, go slow to go fast. Hey, if we get this figured out, well, then these two people are going to work better together and they're going to go do more things and so on and so forth. And when it's uncomfortable, you don't want to address that. So I think that's a key point in any leadership role is to your point, well, I don't think I'm avoiding it. Well, maybe we are.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned earlier about working with kind of your managers and working with them to help coach maybe individual contributors or those on their team or whatever. Take me through a little bit of that process, because I feel like that is one of the tougher things to do, is to work with, in a lot of our, call it frontline management, a lot of them came from the front line. They were a really good person and then we elevated them to a manager and they may not have all the skills. What's that process been like for you?
Oh, it's been a learning process, but I actually feel like we're in a really good place right now. So once a month, I do a meeting with all the team leads, all the director level folks, and then in separate meetings. And so each layer of management has a separate, either 60 to 90 minute a month meeting with me. And we do two things. Number one, we hold each other accountable for whatever we promised to do in the last meeting. And number two is we work through a problem that they're having. So the first meeting is always the same for each group on a semi-annual basis. So twice a year, we have a meeting about creating space. Because what I find is people that get promoted, they get promoted because they're really good at doing things. And then you're asking them to manage people. And almost always their first thought is, I need to do everything for other people so that things get done. And it's the wrong way to think about management. And so the first topic we have is on creating space. You need to manage people and coach people. It's your boss's job to teach you what that is specifically. And they're the ones that are setting your expectations. That's not me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to help you create the space so that you have the time and effort level to do your new job, which means how do we offload the doing of tasks that you are so good at, that you are very bad at getting rid of. And I don't know if you see this in your organization, but so many of my first team leads are and people. I'm going to do my old job and my new one. And it breaks them every single time. And so the first meeting is creating space. And then what we do is they will all email me the week before with problems they're working through. And I'll pick one or two and the team will work through it together. I'll say, hey, Chad is having this problem. Here is what he's doing to deal with it. Chad, tell us a little bit more about that. What would you do? And I have the rest of them talk it through and they're coaching each other. Because what I find is on a day-to-day basis, they're the ones that are going to be there to lift each other up and to help each other. And it creates a good culture of just leaning in. And then I'll usually give my 2 cents on some of the advice they've gotten or maybe what I've done and how I've solved that problem. And then we end it with a few minutes of, hey, how can we be accountable for the next month to each other? And what are we going to improve? and we take notes on that. We send it out afterwards. And I'll check in about once a week at an automated email that I'll check in like, hey, how are you doing with this? And if I sense that somebody's underwater, I'll either have their manager reach out to them, or I personally will, depending on what the issue is. But that's kind of the cadence that we've really gotten into of it helps build camaraderie at the level that they're at. It helps them learn how to solve problems collaboratively, and it helps them create the space to do it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And definitely something that I think most people can utilize, because I feel like sometimes as a leader, you may feel like, that and person yourself, like, oh my gosh, I put this person, and rather than develop them, I'll just do what it is that they need to do. I think the other key piece that you said there that I think is very interesting is kind of creating a peer group within management of like, hey man, I got problems too. Hey, this is what I did to solve it. Why don't you try it with your team? So on and so forth. So I think that that's an interesting piece of thinking about it for sure.
What I also find that it helps is the next level of management. So directors in our organization oversee team leads. A director, if I say like, hey, your team lead's dealing with this, and I tell a director, they'll often say, hey, this other team lead just dealt with this. Will you reach out to them? And so they're not necessarily solving it themselves, but it's just creating this type of organization that is thinking of itself as a whole rather than the sum of parts.
Yeah, no, that's great. One of the other things I want to ask you about, because it sounds like from how you're talking, like leadership development is kind of a key tenet of kind of your culture and how you're growing your company. Do you guys have anything or anything that you guys have tried as far as kind of, I guess you'd call it, and I think what you said leads into it, but kind of leadership development? Like, how do we take someone that was an individual contributor, or we bring them here and we're helping them work through problems, but anything else that you guys are doing actively to kind of hone their leadership skills?
Yeah. So when we look at promotions, we're not only looking at job execution, but values execution as well. Because we find is that the people that are really good at their job that also live very loudly by our values are the ones that have the ability to grow and that actively want to. And so we kind of put some checks and balances in place to say like, oh, like so-and-so is doing really good here. And part of what let me step back. I run an accounting company and I have zero ability to do accounting. So I need to find something to do, and leadership development just happens to be one of those things. And so that worked out really well that I had that ability to not actually lean in and do the work. But we've put a lot of those tenets together, and that coach that I talked about, a lot of how he coaches me and a lot of the principles that he's put together, and it's actually writing a book right now. I take those and I start applying them through the organization. And it's given me just easy things to start to point out on traits that people struggle with and where they have problems and where their teams have issues. And that gives me the ability to do that. The other thing is we're actively asking our team if they want to learn how to manage, which is different than lead. If they want to lead, like kind of what are their ambitions so that we can understand how we can fit into that or how we don't.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think that I think everybody's looking for that, right? If there's one question I get asked, it's like, well, how do you develop managers? How do you give them the tools that they need? And I think it's a lot of what you said. I think it also goes back to what we talked about with culture. It's just consistency, right? It is continually talking about them. People ask me like, oh yeah, what's the last book that you read that was awesome? And it's like, well, like I may take a thing or two from it, but it was more about just being in the right mindset of like being in a space where you're reading something that's inspiring or gets you to think. And to me, that's got to be all the time, or else you find yourself, down a rabbit hole and why am I thinking so negatively? And it's like, oh, well, I'm not surrounding myself with the right things.
Well, and I think there's one thing that you do, and when we had our first conversation, really stuck in my brain is, I think organizationally, when you're really transparent, when you're transparent about how the business is going, how people fit into the company, where the company is going, what it means to get promoted and all of that stuff, that makes it easier on people because people will always fill a void. So if you don't tell them something, they'll guess. and their guesses often really suck. And so I find that just being open and transparent makes it so that I fill as many gaps as I can.
Yeah, I could not agree more. We actually just started up we haven't just started up. We will start it tomorrow morning, where a lot of what we struggle with is, again, 2/3 of our people are out on the road. And oftentimes it feels like they're just getting talked at and getting told what to do and how to do it and so on and so forth. And so what we're doing is our COO is going to lead basically like a town hall with all of our field staff. So all of our field staff will be on the call, and it's basically like, hey, let's just have open lines of communication. Here's a few things that, we've heard that, again, stories that have been made up and kind of went through the rumor mill of like, people are confused about this. Like, I'm here to set the record straight. This is what we're doing. This is what it's about, so on and so forth. And then also get their feedback, because I think so often from a leadership role is we develop things in a vacuum, and it's just, well, this should work. And we throw it out there and we're like, here's the process, follow steps 1 through 10 and everything should be perfect. And then only to find out they're like, this process sucks. Like, you actually do 6 and then 10 and then 2, and then you follow the process. It's like, oh, okay, well, I would have never known that.
I call that the echo chamber. We have to get out of the echo chamber. And when we do, we learn a lot. It's interesting. I was having this conversation. I was just at a convention and I was talking kind of leadership with people, and they were getting ready to do something similar to what you're doing. And I told them, I was like, when we do it, I ask leading questions. It's the lawyer in me. I don't ask too many open-ended questions. Like, does anybody have any questions? No. Do you have any questions about this specific thing? Because it also helps kind of direct the feedback into areas that are impactful and helpful, and versus like totally open-ended questions. You never know what's going to come. And I'm looking for things that benefit them as well as me. And I find that when I ask questions that are leading topically, it gets people thinking along those lines, and it helps build the conversation positively, because I'm sure you've seen it at some point, how sometimes those things end up in a very negative thing, and then you just feel like you're back on the ropes the whole time. And that like leading question mentality has been really helpful for us.
Yeah, no, I like that idea as far as, getting the feedback, and it seems like from a leadership perspective, whenever I ask the question, it's like, well, I don't want to ask a question because I don't want to question what he just said. And it's like, well, no, I need that. I want that.
So my favorite is I'll ask a question and then I will say, and at this point, my team knows I'm not lying. And I'll say, I'm going to sit here until I get 5 questions. And it's going to get real uncomfortable real fast, but just know I've got hours. And occasionally at the beginning, it would last for a little bit. Now, questions flow.
I'm going to steal that one because, that would be if you don't get any questions, there's probably going to be some misinterpretation.
Yeah, they'll fill the gap.
Yeah, one of the things is it relates to this topic. One of the things that we've tried, and I don't know if you've noticed this or had to deal with it, one of the things we notice as we get more and more layered. So like the message starts with me and then it's handed down to someone else and then someone else, and then it has to go out through 10 different people, is that it's like a giant game of telephone. And I'm sure at every business, the number one thing on any engagement survey is the communication around here sucks. And what I've, I think, come to understand, and some of my people may be listening to this like, you're a complete idiot. That's not what happens. But I think this is what happens. I think it is not so much the communication, it is that the communication differs based on who you hear it from, and thus you get a totally different perspective on what actually, like it may have been a great idea, but by the time it reaches the front lines, it's become bastardized to a certain degree. And it's like, oh, this sucks.
No, I think that's right. And by the way, strategically, when we roll out new things, it comes after I've had those meetings with each layer of management, because I have no problem hijacking one of those meetings for my own purpose, which is exactly what you talked about. It's rolling out that new initiative. It's talking about it. It's getting their questions, and then it's having them repeat back to me what they just heard. And then I do it with the next level and then the next level. And by the time I've made it all the way through, then we do the whole organization rollout, because it means that I have trained that repetition into every single person. It still sucks. I mean, it's an organizational thing that still sucks, but it has improved at things slightly.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. And I think it's just okay to be with, like, in a larger organization, communication is never going to be, like, if I ever see on an engagement survey, like, the communication around here is just top notch, unlike anything I've ever seen, it's not going to happen. Because I think a lot of communication sometimes is viewed that communication is bad because of what is communicated. So I think that's where it gets stolen.
I don't know if you've ever, this year I've gotten a lot better at it, but I got some feedback from my team at the end of last year that we were getting really good reviews on communication, because I also like to do like one-on-ones and pop in with people on the front lines, our accounting managers, et cetera. But then somebody would tell me about a problem and I'd say, oh, have you tried this? And then it would make it all the way back up to me through multiple layers. And they're like, you told them what? And I'm like, oh, I was just like spitballing an idea. And they're like, when you spitball an idea as the CEO, they take it as gospel. And I realized communication was great, but it was massively messed up.
Yep. Yeah. So we run into this every once in a while, because there are, myself, my brother, and my dad. And sometimes if, you got an idea, not that it's a bad idea, it may be great, but the minute that you tell someone that this is how we're going to do it is the minute that they're like, well, we were kind of working through the problem and I think we're going to get to that solution, but like, do I need to switch course? What do I need to do? Like, it sends them into a state of panic. And it's like, no, we need to just follow the process, get through it. It'll be all right. There's no spitballing anymore. That is for sure. Well, perfect. Well, no, I think this conversation can be extremely helpful to people as far as just kind of working through like leadership, communication, kind of building other leaders, different stuff like that. I did want to give you a chance, kind of shifting gears here, because I was actually just on a call yesterday. We're recording this on Halloween, so probably right in the middle of people's budgeting season and different things of that nature, which is always everyone's favorite word. But, being what you do at Decimal, I think that we often talk in the trades, especially with a number of smaller companies and their ability to get proper data and be able to make decisions based on that data. Maybe explain a little bit more about Decimal and, how it helps companies and where you guys kind of fill the gaps in maybe an area that you said, yourself, is an area that gets overlooked. It is what it is. That's not, a lot of people that started a company, they didn't start an HVAC company because they were a great tax accountant. They started it because they were a technician. And then, oh, by the way, you got to do the books too.
Well, to be fair, I didn't start Decimal because I'm a tax accountant either. Honest to God, like as a company, in the trades in particular, in order to be good, you have to pay the bills, you got to get paid, and you have to track it all. For the very least, you have to track it all so you can pay your taxes. Putting in the right software and systems that can make things paperless, that can make things so they're on your phone when you're out on a call or when you're at home or whatever you're doing, those are the types of things that make it so it's easy. We put in those types of systems for companies. Nobody should deal with paper very often. And I know that that's like a crazy thing in some companies in the trades. Others have gotten very paperless. That, I think, is a really important foundation. It's just like any house. You have to build the foundation well, put in the right tools and systems, and then make sure that you have information as you need it. So we pay the bills for people. We can do invoicing on big projects. We can help them put in, House Call Pro, Jobber, Service Titan. We do all of that for companies. And then it's also making sure that you not only have reports on a monthly basis, but you look at them with somebody that can say like, hey, I noticed this. I find a lot of companies that particularly that do have a papered process have a really big list of AR that's outstanding. And getting on top of that, making sure that you have somebody that is holding you accountable for that, because I don't know about you, I like collecting money. I do this for that. Putting in those types of processes, having trusted people that can do it for you. And then if you need more, like somebody like a company like your size, hey, you want to think about growing, that's great as a concept. At some point, and you're doing this now, in this year's cycle, you have to put a plan together. What's that going to look like? What are we going to spend? Growth is expensive. How are we going to do it? What's it going to cost? And then tracking to that every year to see like, hey, things are going great, let's keep doing it. Or hey, things are going really poorly, let's pull back. Those are the types of things that I just think everybody fundamentally needs to do as a business. And that's where a team kind of helps.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I was, like I said, I was talking on a call with it about, just how important in any business, but I think especially in the trades, like, just understanding what the data is. And that's not to say that you're wrong if you don't know how to do it. There again, I'm no financial wizard, but finding that person or, potentially a company like Decimal that can get you the right information, because it's very difficult to grow a company if you don't know where in the hell you stand today. What does that look like? And what did we do all this past year so that we can make an educated guess on what we think we can do next year and where we need to invest money and so on and so forth?
Well, and I think particularly, growing up generally in the trades, like one of the things that I've seen is too many businesses are what I would call bank account businesses. As long as I'm getting money into my bank account and that's more than I'm losing, I'm happy. I know where things are. I know where things stand. The problem is that's kind of a misconception. Like how and where, what are the good things you're doing? What are the things that aren't good? Like you can be leaving hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in your business simply because you're a bank account manager. And the other thing is like hiring people, or literally we just brought somebody on a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to send them this when it comes out. It was my cousin's wife's aunt was doing the books, guaranteeing she was not doing a good job. And boy, did that require a lot of work. But you have a lot of that kind of comes in and it's like, hey, I started my business. I'm not going to do it. Let me find somebody. And somebody raises their hand or thinks that they do it or took an accounting class in high school. And like, those are the types of things that aren't going to set you up typically for success. And hiring somebody gets really expensive really fast, and the turnover tends to be pretty high as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Matt, I can't thank you enough for taking a little bit of time on Halloween. I know before we started, we were talking about our trick-or-treat plans. You were stealing candy from little kids.
It's on my calendar.
Yeah, it's on the calendar, so you're ready to go. You got just a couple hours before you got to head on out. But no, really appreciate it. I guess if people are interested in getting a hold of you and finding out more about what Decimal is and how they can do that, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Well, first, Chad, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate and love and enjoy the conversation. People can follow me on LinkedIn. We also, as you were a guest on it, do an After the First Million podcast about kind of what it's like to grow and scale your business, and pretty cool stories from a lot of people doing a lot of cool things. And I think those are probably the two best places, is After the First Million podcast or LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, again, Matt, really appreciate the time. It was great talking with you. Thanks for all the insight, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to get connected, you can find me at chadmpeterman.com. To see what our team's up to, you can visit petermanbros.com. As always, keep growing out there.